Our story begins in Lufkin, Texas. Police Sergeant David Casper receives a call from a woman named Evelyn Hamilton. Hamilton wishes to file a complaint. According to her, the $40 worth of marijuana she recently purchased from a local dealer is of such low quality that it's having no effect on her. Sergeant Casper goes to her place of residence immediately to investigate the complaint. When he asked Hamilton if she still had any marijuana on her, she responded by pulling a small amount of marijuana out of her bra. Things didn't turn out too well for Evelyn Hamilton. She was arrested on charge of possession of drug paraphernalia. But why? What did she do wrong? This was our first question when we heard this story, and it led us to a knowledge question. For what reasons does our society ban certain recreational drugs but not others? First, we must define our terms. For what reasons? When we ask for what reasons, we're asking both what reasons are given, what reasons are not given, and what is the ideal solution. Banned. When something is banned, we mean that it has been prohibited for all people by the government. This excludes religious or social institutions unaffiliated with the government, as they don't have as much power. Our society. For simplicity, we will mainly speak about our own society, the United States. This includes both governmental and public opinions. That said, we may also refer to other cultures to give some comparison. Recreational drug. A mood or mind-altering substance. In this presentation, we will focus on recreational as opposed to medical use because it's a little more two-sided. First, let's acknowledge our biases. We are white teenage males living in Portland, and there's an inherent ignorance that comes with those things. We come from a community where drug use is relatively common. We also don't believe that just because the ways of knowing are all different, that they are all equally valid. We tend to use reason and logic as our primary ways of knowing. That said, we will try to look at things from all different perspectives and mindsets. Speaking of different mindsets, let's all calm down, relax, and cast aside the complexity and confusion which characterizes our modern life. We are going to go on a journey to a simpler time, a journey into the past. Drug use has been around nearly as long as humanity, and had a significant spiritual effect on the attitudes and ways of the indigenous people from which we are descended. Alcohol has been around since as early as the Neolithic period, and marijuana was used for its medical properties for thousands of years. By the 1800s, morphine, heroin, and other opiates were used liberally in medicine for their valuable pain-killing properties, and even Coca-Cola contained cocaine. The earliest significant resistance to drug use in the U.S. was the temperance movement. The temperance movement, often associated with women's suffrage, was a movement advocating the prohibition of alcohol, usually related to domestic violence, or more specifically, drunk husbands beating their wives. Instead of trying to legislate domestic violence laws, the temperance movement set out to demonize alcohol, often citing a religious authority. However, once instigated, the real-life implications of prohibition gave way to widespread bootlegging and organized crime, causing the government to repeal the law around 10 years later. Prohibition is widely considered to be a failure. However, it actually did decrease alcohol consumption. In the decade before Prohibition went into effect in 1920, alcohol consumption in the United States averaged 2.6 gallons per person per year. It fell to 0.73 gallons during the Prohibition decade, then doubled to 1.5 gallons in the decade after repeal, and is now back to 2.6 gallons. However, Prohibition also led to increased homicide due to the organized crime who thrived off the bootlegging industry. This homicide rate declined after alcohol was legalized. Around the ending of alcohol prohibition, a new form of prohibition was beginning to take hold. People were beginning to realize that drugs such as cocaine, heroin, and morphine could actually have negative effects on people's health, and the government increased the regulation and labeling of many drugs. In 1930, an up-and-coming official named Harry J. Anslinger, who worked for the Bureau of Narcotics, began a campaign to ban marijuana. The campaign included widespread media outreach, warning of the dangers of marijuana. These ads often associated marijuana with things that would cause a negative emotional reaction in society at the time. Black people, jazz music, and the devil, Many anti-marijuana films were produced in this time, the most famous of which being Reefer Madness.
Lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide.
Despite this, by the 1960s, recreational drug use, especially psychedelics, spiked in popularity. To counter the counterculture, the Controlled Substances Act, which separated different drugs into 5 schedules, ranging from those with the lowest potential for abuse and highest medical value, to highest potential for abuse and lowest medical value. Drugs considered in the most dangerous schedule included heroin, marijuana, ecstasy, LSD, and psilocybin. Drugs in the second schedule included cocaine, methamphetamine, and morphine. To control these substances, Richard Nixon launched the War on Drugs around 1970. This included both military action to halt the flow of drugs into the country and police action against users and dealers in the United States, largely by the DEA. Drug arrests have greatly increased prison populations to the point where today half of people in prison are there for drug-related offenses. Some of the government's methods were questionable. Cannabis fields in Mexico and Colombia were sprayed with poisonous herbicides to dissuade usage. In addition to the environmental and economic devastation this caused to the areas it affected, it didn't stop many people from continuing to use the poisoned marijuana. In addition, the government carried out several questionable experiments on unknowing individuals on the effects of drug use.
2 hours later, the squad, all except the drill sergeant, now drugged with LSD, again was ordered to fall in. There was much laughter as the group attempted to give expression to inner emotions.
By the 1980s, the war on drugs had become a new priority for Ronald Reagan. Nancy Reagan created the Just Say No campaign, which spawned many anti-drug public service announcements.
This is crack, rock cocaine.
Although drug use did decline during Reagan's presidency, there has been no evidence for the effectiveness of PSAs, especially more recently. This PSA sends the message that jumping off buildings is a safer alternative to drug use. Is this correct? Many of these ads are put out by the Partnership for a Drug-Free America. In the mid-90s, it was revealed that they were funded largely by alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceutical companies, the same companies who had the most to gain from the current system of drug scheduling.
Every day, I rise above it.
In the United States, we have the right to certain freedoms, such as the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the freedom of religion. These freedoms come from the idea of the autonomy of the individual. It assumes the government has no inherent authority over the personal lives and beliefs of its constituents beyond what is necessary. This philosophy is extended by some to mean that a consenting adult should have the legal right to do just about anything that doesn't directly hurt anyone else. In other words, as Zachariah Chaffee said, one man's right to swing his arm ends where another man's nose begins. This idea, which advocates for our right to do things regardless of whether they're popular, makes sense to many people up until the point where they no longer view the activity as popular. Does this philosophy allow for hate speech, prostitution, cannibalism, suicide? Certain activities, even ones that hurt no one else, cause negative emotional knee-jerk reactions in society. One of these activities is recreational drug use. If we assume that all recreational drugs are harmful, meaning they all cause addiction, dependence, and eventual death, then the real question is self-harm unethical? Well, it's not technically illegal. There is technically no law preventing you from bashing your own head against the wall until you have to go to the emergency room. However, while on the surface self-destructive activities only hurt the person partaking in them, they can also indirectly have a negative impact on friends, family, and society. This fear is part of the reason for people's negative emotional reaction. In addition, any society where people collectively pitch in towards a healthcare system, it can be said that every person also has some responsibility to society to maintain their own well-being. Does this mean we don't have complete ownership over our bodies? Maybe, maybe not. Some people maintain that in a truly free society, a person